Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
It was just a few minutes past midnight when Anna felt his presence. She had felt it plenty of times before, but never that strong. Anna's bones trembled as ice-cold chills began to travel through her entire body. She shivered in her bed and clutched her handmade quilt around herself more tightly in an attempt to find even the smallest bit of warmth. Death was near. Anna was sure of that. She'd been tracking him for years and even managed to spare a few people from his morbid touch. Though she'd never clearly seen him, she's had the ability to sense him for as long as she could remember. Anna braved the cold as she slipped out of bed quickly when her nose caught a familiar scent. It was his scent. Any time he was near, she always smelled the same aroma, cinnamon laced with something similar to sulfur. Anna quickly tied her cotton bathrobe around herself as she slid on her fuzzy house slippers. Cracking open the door to her room, she cautiously peered out into the hallway. Things were dim and quiet, besides the loud ticking of an antique grandfather clock on the wall. All seemed calm otherwise, but an intense and eerie feeling of dread surrounded her. Anna quietly stepped into the hall and softly made her way towards her mother's room to check on her. She had been having chest pains the night before, so that put Anna on alert ever since. Turning the handle that led to her mother's room, her pulse quickened. The sense of dread she had felt intensified, and now almost overwhelmed her. With her fingertips planted firmly on the doorknob, she twisted it and began to pull the door open. As she did, she was intensely hit with the strong smell of cinnamon and the pungent odor of sulfur. The scent hit her nostrils like a freight train and was so overpowering to her senses, she almost retched. Anna swallowed the urge down and pushed her way onward regardless. There, in the dim light of her mother's lamp, the sight before her caused her to freeze in place as a sharp gasp escaped her lips. There he stood, at the foot of her mother's bed, in all his deathly glory. Anna felt glued to the floor, as her eyes scanned the dark, horrific figure before her. Her heart then hammered in her chest with such force it felt like it would burst through her ribcage. All the words and verbal sounds left her body as she stared at him. He was tall, but not freakishly tall, like she'd always imagined him to be. He kept his back turned to her, but she knew that he was more than aware of her presence. Anna took a few quick seconds to observe the parts of him she could see. His body was cloaked in a floor-length leather coat that was a deep shade of coal in color. Matching boots adorned his feet, but she noticed a peculiar design on the buckle of each one. It was tough for her to see clearly with such little light in the room, but the buckle had a skull etched into it. Anna swallowed hard as the figure slowly turned and gazed at her. Her mouth fell agape instantly as her whole being felt like it could collapse in terror at the sheer sight of him. His pants and shirt were also black beneath his coat. His raven hair was semi-long, but on the top of his head, the rest was clipped short. He looked practically human, except his eyes. They were blacker than the darkest nights, like if they were two gaping holes instead. They gave away in no motion, and were unworldly to look at, as they sat atop his high and defined cheekbones. His face was pale and void of expression. Anna felt as if she would choke on the lump that was stuck in her throat. Her fear had escalated, as he stood silently and unmoving, while he continued to peer in her direction. Her eyes flickered anxiously to her mother's form in the bed behind him. She was so far away that she couldn't tell if her mother was still breathing or still alive at all. Anna's lips frantically attempted to form words to call out to her mother, but it was as if they were sewn completely shut. No sound radiated through the room besides the erratic beating of her own heart. As if on cue, the figure spoke in a deep and unnatural voice and said,
"To answer the impending question in your mind, yes, she's alive. For now.
Anna's body began to convulse with uncontrollable fright and panic. Not only could he read her mind, but she automatically knew deep in her soul that he was there to take her mother's life. It was only then that the terrible realization brought courage back into her being. She'd be damned if she'd let him take her mother. Anna's hands balled into fists as she glared daggers silently at the ominous being in front of her. His originally slack, thin lips curled into an evil grin of amusement in her direction.
That can be arranged.
He stated, followed by a deep, abrupt chuckle that radiated through the walls and caused them to silently quake. Even though he was extremely frightening, Anna wasn't afraid to die for the ones that she loved most. She never feared death itself, but was instead afraid of losing her loved ones to death. She addressed him in her mind and said, "Fine, take me instead. I'm willingly offering to take her place." The figure Anna knew as Death stood in silence for a moment. He took a few steps towards her until he stood mere inches from her body. He started to circle her, all while he said nothing. She held her breath and fought against her fear with every ounce of strength she could pull from within. His presence was so intense, so overwhelming. Being so close to him made her feel like the world was going to cave in, and that he was somehow sucking the very life from her soul just by standing next to her. As he paced around Anna, he sniffed the air several times. He could smell the fear as it saturated the air that surrounded her, like that of a thick fog. He could sense the way she tried to mask her fear, and that fact alone gave him more satisfaction. He was in fact death after all. He enjoyed instilling terror in the hearts of the living. It was not only something cruel he enjoyed, it was his job, his very purpose. Anna forced her eyes open as he finally went and stopped in front of her. A wicked smile formed on his face as he teased,
How sweet. But things don't exactly work like that, darling.
The tone and way he said,
Darling,
sent a shiver down her spine faster than any bolt of lightning. Only her deceased grandmother had been the one to call her that in such a fashion. Anna quickly realized that he was toying with her purposefully. He'd actually got joy out of the torment he made her feel. She straightened her stance and held her head up high and voiced, "You can torment and deceive me all you want, but I'm not letting you take my mother. She's a good woman who makes a difference in so many lives. I refuse." Just when Anna didn't think it was any more possible, the room grew even colder. She could see her own breath right in front of her very eyes as she exhaled. Death narrowed his solid black gaze at her and growled,
It is not up to you, you pathetic mortal. Now, if you will excuse me.
In a matter of seconds, he vanished from in front of Anna and hovered over her mother at the head of her bed. He then outstretched his pale, bony hand towards her. Anna watched the events in sheer and complete horror. She couldn't lose her mother, not after all she had already lost everyone else she had ever loved in the past. Everything seemed like it was moving in slow motion. All the while, Anna felt weighted to the floor. Without a second thought, a scream of panic mixed with determination ripped from her mouth as she ran from across the room. She grabbed his hand while he was mere inches from grasping the hand of her mother. Anna heard a series of deafening, unholy roars and growls as darkness clouded her vision. She couldn't hear anything and felt like the very wind was being sucked out of her. She blindly tumbled down what seemed like a dark, never-ending abyss. Suddenly, her vision came back to her. She found herself on a crimson shade of cobblestone brick. She writhed around frantically in pain as she gripped her right ear. Death stood a few feet from her, unconcerned. As he waited for the effects of the transition to wear off, he casually instructed,
Foolish human, stop struggling. It will only prolong the pain. And I have no time to waste on your pathetic afflictions.
Anna stilled herself on the ground and tried concentrating on her breathing for a few moments. She then willed herself into a sitting position and tried to shake off how dizzy she felt. Her world was spinning and her brain felt rattled. She glanced up at Death and questioned, "What happened? Where am?" Death cut her off as he mocked.
What happened? Where am I?
He rolled his eyes in annoyance as he announced,
I know. I've heard the same questions over and over from thousands of people before you. To answer everything, you're dead, and this, my dear Anastasia, is Purgatory.
Tonight's story was Descent to Purgatory, written by Mandie Mortem. If you enjoyed this, chances are you'll enjoy the content over on her channel. The links to her YouTube channel, as well as all of her social medias, will be in the description below. Please check her out and let her know P sent you. Hey, did you have merch? Well, I do. And if you like to walk around, representing my realm and gaining new travelers, the links to my merch store, as well as all of my other social medias, will be in the description below. As always, I'd like to say a special thank you to all my lovely Patreons. 242 Reads, Rando Calrissian, Seraphine the Midnight Bard, Hair-Raising Narratives, Spooky Boo Scary Storytime, Lycan Trucker, Awkward Alien Kayla, and Pimp Demon. And if you'd like to join in these lovely travelers but I love my fire, you can do so by becoming a Patreon as well. Just remember, support is always appreciated, but it's never expected. Please, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ding that bell for all future content if you're new, as it will really help push this video into the algorithm and helps the channel grow.
But as always, travelers, once you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.